millionaire posted a beach photo captioned "Freedom," smiling beside his mistress, convinced his past was finished. Then a calm comment appeared from his wife. Just 5 words. No anger, no drama. Within hours, the internet turned, timelines collapsed, and his perfect escape unraveled in ways he never saw coming. Before we go any further, take a breath with me. Stories like this aren't just about scandal or betrayal. They're about people, choices, and the quiet strength we don't always see coming. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or stronger in silence, you're not alone here. This channel exists because of you, the ones who stay, feel, and reflect. If this story already speaks to you, leave a kind word below. Sometimes, connection is the bravest thing we choose. The photo went live at 7:42 a.m., just early enough to catch the East Coast waking up, and just late enough to look intentional. A private beach, pale sand untouched by footprints, water so blue it looked edited even before the filter. He stood barefoot near the shoreline, linen shirt half unbuttoned, sunglasses angled just right. The woman beside him leaned in close, young, glowing, laughing at something outside the frame. A caption was a single word: freedom. For the first few minutes, it felt small. Just another post in the endless feed of curated lives and expensive happiness. Then the likes started stacking up faster than usual. Comments followed. Proud of you, man. You deserve this. Living your best life. The algorithm caught the scent of money and drama and did what it always did. It pushed harder. He watched the numbers climb while sipping coffee on the balcony of a rented villa that cost more per night than most people's monthly rent. A sea breeze was calm, obedient. He felt light. That was the point of the post. After months of lawyers, meetings, and a divorce filing done quietly and cleanly, this was his announcement. Not a statement, not an explanation. A visual. He believed images were more powerful than words, and this one said everything he wanted it to say. I'm free. I've moved on. I'm winning. The mistress exposure hadn't crossed his mind, because in his head there was nothing to expose anymore. The paperwork was filed. The ring was gone. The marriage, at least legally, was already a memory being processed by people paid to handle it. He had blocked his wife's number weeks earlier, not out of anger, but efficiency. No need for lingering conversations. No need for emotional noise. Silence was cleaner. The woman beside him leaned over, phone in hand, smiling at the screen. They love it, she said. You broke the internet before breakfast. Her laugh was bright, practiced, confident. She fit perfectly into the frame, which was exactly why he had chosen her. Youth photographed well. Desire always did. He refreshed the post again. A blue checkmark account had commented. Then another. Someone tagged a gossip page. Someone else reposted it with the caption "billionaire energy," though he technically hated that word. Millionaire scandal sounded uglier, but even that carried a thrill. Attention was attention. The viral post traveled faster than he expected. By noon, it had escaped his usual audience. People who didn't know him were weighing in, projecting stories onto his smile. Some praised his courage. Some criticized the age gap. A few asked where the wife was now, but those comments drowned quickly under applause and flame emojis. He didn't scroll for long. He never did. That was the assistant's job. Instead, he set the phone down and looked out at the horizon, convinced this moment would mark the beginning of a simpler chapter. He had always believed control came from decisiveness, from moving first, for not looking back. Across the ocean and several time zones away, the silent wife woke up to the sound of rain tapping softly against the kitchen window. The house felt larger than usual, not because anything had changed, but because she was finally noticing the space. She poured herself coffee, black, no sugar, and opened her laptop out of habit more than curiosity. A notification blinked on the corner of the screen. Someone had tagged her. She almost ignored it. When she clicked the link, the image loaded slowly, line by line, like a truth taking its time. She didn't react right away. No sharp inhale, no rush of heat. She had trained herself out of those responses years ago. Instead, she studied the photo the way she studied contracts, eyes scanning details others skipped. The curve of the shoreline, the angle of the sun, the watch on his wrist, the glass on the small table behind them. That was when she noticed it. It was small, embarrassingly small. Something no stranger would ever catch, no fan would ever understand. But to her, it was unmistakable. A detail tied to a private moment, a shared decision, a promise made quietly and never spoken about again. Her fingers stilled over the trackpad. She checked the timestamp, then the location tag. Then she opened another folder on her computer, one she hadn't touched in weeks. Inside were dates, notes, screenshots. Not out of suspicion, but preparation. She cross-referenced calmly, methodically, like someone confirming a suspicion she had already made peace with. Back on the beach, he laughed as the woman took another photo, this one more playful, less composed. He didn't post it. Not yet. He liked spacing things out. Let the moment breathe. Let the internet want more. The power, he believed, was in controlling the drip. His phone buzzed again. A new comment had surfaced near the top, briefly visible before being pushed down by louder voices. It was from her account. No profile photo change. No dramatic bio update. Just her name, the same one she had always used. The comment was short. 5 words. At first, it blended in. No anger, no accusation, no explanation. He didn't even see it until someone else replied with a single question mark. By the time he noticed, the post had already crossed into something else. Screenshots were being taken. People were rereading. The tone in the replies began to shift, curiosity replacing celebration. He frowned slightly, thumb hovering over the screen, trying to remember when silence had ever sounded so loud. And somewhere between the sea breeze and the growing hum of notifications, the balance began to tilt, quietly, irreversibly, toward a kind of online humiliation he hadn't planned for at all. Long before the viral post, before the millionaire scandal took on a life of its own, the marriage had already begun dissolving in ways that didn't leave fingerprints. It didn't end with screaming or slammed doors or dramatic ultimatums. It ended the way many long marriages do when power tilts too far in one direction. Slowly, politely, behind closed doors, where silence could be mistaken for peace. They had once been a team, at least on paper. She remembered the early years clearly, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest. Back then, he talked about ideas instead of exits. He asked questions. He listened, or at least made an effort to. Success was something they imagined together, late at night, sitting on the floor of their first apartment, surrounded by takeout boxes and half-finished plans. She had believed in him before the world did, and for a long time, that had mattered. But as his world expanded, hers shrank without anyone formally deciding it should. Meetings replaced dinners. Assistants replaced conversations. He stopped asking her opinion and started informing her of decisions that had already been made. Not cruelly, casually, as if it were only natural that certain roles faded with time. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. She just didn't react the way people expected her to. When the first lawyer email arrived, it wasn't framed as a threat. It was neutral, almost kind. Language about amicable separation, mutual respect, clean transitions. He presented it to her over breakfast, sliding the tablet across the counter like a business proposal. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We can handle this like adults." She had nodded then, taken a sip of her coffee, and asked one practical question about timelines. That response alone had convinced him he was right about her. Too calm, too passive. He mistook composure for weakness, the same way he always had. The divorce filing followed quickly after that. Quiet, efficient, no public announcement, no dramatic statements. He made sure his legal team emphasized discretion. He didn't want noise. Noise attracted scrutiny, and scrutiny slowed momentum. He was already planning the next phase of his life, and dragging the past behind him felt unnecessary. Blocking her number came later, after one unanswered message sat unread on his screen for an entire afternoon. It wasn't a fight that pushed him to do it. It was annoyance. The idea that she might still reach him, still interrupt, still exist in a space he was trying to clear out. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself it was cleaner that way. He didn't consider what it signaled. When the block went through, there was no immediate relief. Just a dull sense of closure he assumed would grow with time. He didn't tell anyone he had done it. There was no need. In his version of events, she was already gone, emotionally if not geographically. The silent wife had accepted her role in the ending. That was the story he carried with him. She, on the other hand, experienced the silence differently. The first time she tried to call, and the call didn't go through, she stared at the screen for a long moment, then set the phone down. No second attempt. No message sent through another channel. She had learned long ago that chasing answers from someone who had already decided not to respond only drained energy better spent elsewhere. Instead, she adjusted. She changed routines. She stopped expecting him to come home at any particular hour. She began sleeping better, surprisingly. Without the constant hum of tension, the house felt calmer, even emptier. She took longer walks, read more, listened more carefully to what wasn't being said. People around her filled the silence with their own assumptions. Friends whispered sympathy. Family offered support she hadn't asked for. Some encouraged her to fight harder, to demand explanations, to protect her image. She smiled politely and declined. She didn't want noise either. But unlike him, her silence wasn't about escape. It was about observation. Meanwhile, he told his version of the story easily. At dinners, at charity events, in quiet conversations with people who mattered. We grew apart, he said. No drama. It happens. He spoke about her with a detached fondness, as if she were a chapter he respected, but didn't miss. The narrative worked. People nodded. They admired his maturity. When the mistress entered his life publicly, it felt less like betrayal to him, and more like timing. He didn't see it as overlapping worlds. He saw it as a clean handoff. The marriage was over. The rest was just optics catching up. If there was any guilt, it stayed buried under confidence and momentum. What he never asked himself was why she never tried to correct the story. Why she never posted, never commented, never reached out through mutual contacts. The absence of reaction reassured him. In his mind, it confirmed everything he believed about her. She had faded gracefully. She had stepped aside. The truth was less convenient. She watched him build his new narrative, the way someone watches a structure rise on a flawed foundation. She recognized the shortcuts, the overconfidence, the assumption that nothing would shift beneath him because it never had before. And she noted something else too, something quieter, but far more telling. He had stopped being careful. The viral post would come later. The mistress exposure would explode louder than either of them expected. But even before that, before the 5-word comment and the online humiliation that followed, the real mistake had already been made. He believed the end of the marriage meant the end of her relevance. He believed silence meant surrender. That belief settled comfortably into his thinking unchallenged, right up until the moment it began working against him. Because silence, when chosen deliberately, has weight. And while he was busy narrating his freedom, she was still listening, still noticing, still holding her position quietly, waiting for the moment when the noise would finally create its own opening. And when that moment came, it wouldn't require shouting at all. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. If you were in his place, would you have posted that photo or stayed silent? Drop your answer in the comments, rate the story so far from 0 to 10, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Staying till the end really helps, and every bit of support keeps stories like this alive. The house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if it were holding its breath alongside her. She sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, the screen casting a pale glow across the smooth wood surface, rain tapping steadily against the window behind her. Outside, the world kept moving at its usual pace. Cars passed. Lights flickered on in neighboring apartments. None of it touched her. Her attention was locked on the image frozen in front of her. The viral post had already spread far beyond its original context. People she didn't recognize had reposted it, cropped it, zoomed into it, turned it into commentary and entertainment. To them, it was a simple story. A rich man celebrating freedom with a younger woman on a beach that looked like it belonged in an ad. A clean break. A bold new beginning. The internet loved stories like that. They were easy to digest. She saw something else. At first, she had taken in the whole composition the way anyone would. The colors, the posture, the way he stood slightly ahead of the woman, shoulders relaxed, chin lifted, owning the frame without effort. The way she leaned toward him, smiling up at his face instead of the camera, as if that detail alone proved something. None of that surprised her. He had always known how to perform happiness. What stopped her was a reflection. It was faint, barely noticeable, unless you knew to look for it. In the background, on the small metal table set just behind them, there was a glass, clear, expensive, and on the curved surface of that glass, distorted by light and angle, was a reflection of his wrist. Not the watch itself, but what sat just beneath it. A thin, almost invisible mark most people would have mistaken for a shadow. She leaned closer to the screen. Her fingers moved instinctively, zooming in, adjusting contrast, tilting the image slightly. The mark remained, consistent, real. Her stomach didn't drop, her breath didn't catch. Instead, a strange calm settled over her, the kind that comes when a puzzle finally shows its missing piece. That mark wasn't random. It wasn't lighting. It was a scar. Years earlier, during a winter they barely spoke about anymore, he had cut his wrist badly on broken glass while rushing through a renovation project late at night. She had been the one who drove him to the hospital, the one who held pressure on the wound, the one who listened as the doctor warned him about long-term nerve sensitivity. The scar had faded over time, but never disappeared completely. It only showed under certain conditions. Heat, sun, salt water. She remembered standing with him in their bathroom, months later, helping him choose a watch that would sit comfortably above it. She remembered the conversation, quiet and practical, about how some things stayed even when you wanted them gone. That scar placed him somewhere specific, somewhere he had promised, in writing, not to be. Her eyes shifted to the caption again. Freedom. She didn't scoff. She didn't smile. She simply opened another tab and typed in the location tag attached to the post. A private stretch of coast, expensive, exclusive, known for discretion. She checked the date, then the time, then she opened her calendar. The connection formed cleanly, without drama. There was a clause buried deep in the divorce filing, one he had likely skimmed past, assuming she wouldn't catch it. A timing clause, a behavioral clause. It outlined conditions tied to asset protection and public conduct prior to finalization. Standard language. His lawyer had called it boilerplate. He had dismissed it with a wave of his hand. She hadn't. She pulled up the document now, scrolling until she found the exact paragraph. Her eyes moved slowly, rereading each sentence not to understand it, but to confirm what she already knew. The date on the post intersected with a window that clause clearly defined. The location intersected with another. And the presence of the woman, framed the way it was, eliminated any plausible deniability. It wasn't the affair that mattered. That had been obvious long before lawyers got involved. It was the timing, the carelessness, the way he had handed over proof without realizing it. The internet would argue about morality, about age gaps, about power dynamics, about whether a man deserved happiness after a long marriage. She didn't care about any of that. Her concern was simpler and far more dangerous. Evidence. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes briefly, not out of exhaustion, but focus. When she opened them again, she began organizing. Screenshots labeled with timestamps. Archived versions of the post in case it disappeared. Copies stored locally and in the cloud. She worked methodically, the same way she always had when something mattered. Across the ocean, he laughed at something the woman beside him said, unaware that the image he had posted so casually had already slipped out of his control. His phone buzzed repeatedly on the table, notifications stacking up faster than he could clear them. He didn't notice the shift in tone yet. The way certain comments had begun to repeat the same word. Curious. Interesting. She noticed everything. When she finished, she didn't confront him. She didn't call a lawyer immediately. She didn't reach out to anyone at all. She simply logged into her social media account, the same one she had barely used in months, and navigated to the post. She read through the comments once, calmly, as if studying a crowd from a distance. Then she typed 5 words. She didn't revise them. She didn't soften them. She didn't add context. The strength of them was in what they didn't explain. She hit post and closed the app without waiting for a response. The comment appeared quietly, almost politely, beneath a mountain of noise. And in that moment, without raising her voice or stepping into the spotlight, she shifted the entire story. She stood, rinsed her coffee mug, and placed it in the drying rack. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist. Inside, the air felt lighter, as if something long suspended had finally settled into place. By the time the first stranger asked what her comment meant, she was already gone from the screen, leaving the internet to do what it always did best when given just enough information, speculate, analyze, and turn carelessness into consequence. The detail no one else saw had done its job. At first, nothing happened. The comment sat there quietly, tucked between a string of fire emojis and a congratulatory message from someone trying to be seen. 5 words, no punctuation, no explanation. It didn't shout. It didn't accuse. It simply existed, calm and unbothered, like a chair placed in the middle of a loud room. For several minutes, it went unnoticed. The post was moving fast, refreshing every few seconds as new reactions poured in. Praise drowned out nuance. Celebration buried curiosity. He glanced at his phone again, while the woman beside him talked about dinner reservations, nodded absently, and slipped the device back onto the table. He was already thinking ahead, already imagining the next post, the next angle, the next wave of admiration. Then someone replied to the comment. Just one line. What does that mean? Another followed seconds later. Wait, is that true? A third. Can someone explain? The tone shifted subtly, the way weather does before a storm. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just enough to be felt by anyone paying attention? He noticed the vibration before he noticed the content. His phone buzzed differently now, longer, heavier, like something insisting rather than requesting. He picked it up and scrolled, his smile thinning as his eyes skimmed the screen. His name was still being praised, but threaded through the noise was something unfamiliar. Confusion, repetition, screenshots. He stopped scrolling when he saw it. Her name. Not tagged aggressively, not highlighted. Just there, attached to 5 words that suddenly felt louder than everything else combined. He read them once, then again, frowning slightly, as if the meaning might rearrange itself if given enough time. He scoffed softly, shaking his head. People read into everything, he said, more to himself than anyone else. The woman leaned over his shoulder, curious. What? She asked. Nothing, he replied quickly, locking the phone. Just internet nonsense. She shrugged, uninterested, and turned back toward the water. To her, the day was still perfect. Sun, attention, luxury. She had no reason to sense the fracture yet. Back on the screen, the comment began to travel. Someone took a screenshot and posted it separately. Someone else added a thread. A gossip account with 500,000 followers reposted it with a caption that asked a question without asking anything at all. 5 words from the silent wife? That's it. He refreshed the page again, this time slower, more deliberately. The comment was rising. Replies stacked beneath it, pushing it upward. People were quoting it now, isolating it from the original image. The viral post was splitting into 2 narratives, and for the first time since he had hit publish, he wasn't in control of either. His phone rang, a familiar number. He ignored it. Another call followed almost immediately. Then a message from someone on his legal team. Have you seen the comment? He exhaled through his nose, irritation replacing confidence. He typed back quickly. It's nothing. Let it pass. But it didn't pass. The internet did what it always did when handed ambiguity. It slowed down and zoomed in. Users began combing through the image with fresh eyes, now guided by the implication that something was hidden in plain sight. The same details she had noticed were suddenly being circled, highlighted, debated. The reflection, the timestamp, the location, the timing. He watched it unfold in real time, disbelief hardening into something sharper. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The story was supposed to be simple, clean. He was free. She was quiet. The audience applauded and moved on. Instead, the silence was speaking for itself. The woman beside him sensed the shift before he admitted it. You're not listening, she said lightly, though her eyes searched his face. What's wrong? Nothing, he repeated, but this time the word lacked conviction. She glanced at his phone, still face down. Is it her? He didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. She commented, he said finally. That's all. Her expression changed, curiosity sharpening into something defensive. And nothing, he said, more firmly now. She's implying something she can't prove. He believed that, or wanted to. Across town, across screens, she was already gone from the conversation. She hadn't replied to a single question. She hadn't clarified. She hadn't liked or pinned anything. The 5-word comment remained untouched, static, as if it had always been there. People filled the silence eagerly. By late afternoon, online humiliation had replaced celebration entirely. Headlines began shifting tone, swapping words like freedom for reckless, bold for careless. The same accounts that had praised him hours earlier now asked whether he had violated terms, crossed lines, revealed too much too soon. He called his assistant, voice tight. Get ahead of this. We're trying, she said carefully. But it's spreading faster than we can manage. He ended the call and stood abruptly, pacing the length of the balcony. The sea no longer calmed him. It mocked him with its indifference. He replayed the moment he had posted the photo, searching for the mistake, the crack, the miscalculation. He had always prided himself on precision. The 5-word comment sat there, unchanged, refusing to escalate, refusing to engage. That was what unsettled him most. If she had attacked, he could have defended. If she had accused, he could have denied. But this was something else. It was an invitation without instructions, and the world had accepted it eagerly. As evening approached, he opened the app again, thumb hovering over the comment. For a moment, he considered deleting the entire post. For another, he considered replying, laughing it off, reframing it as bitterness. Both options felt wrong. Both felt reactive. He locked the phone instead. Behind him, the woman watched silently, no longer smiling. The air between them had changed, thick with unspoken questions neither of them wanted to ask. Somewhere else, far from beaches and cameras, a silent wife sat at her table, phone turned face down, completely still. She didn't need to watch the chaos unfold. She had already said everything she needed to say, and the 5 words continued to do their work, quietly dismantling a narrative built on the assumption that silence meant nothing at all. By the time the sun dipped lower over the water, the tone online had shifted completely. What had begun as celebration had curdled into something analytical, almost clinical. The internet had stopped cheering and started calculating. Threads multiplied. Screenshots spread faster than the original image ever had. People weren't reacting anymore. They were investigating. Someone posted a side-by-side comparison of the beach photo and an older image from years earlier, zoomed in on the same wrist, the same faint scar, the same watch positioned just high enough to reveal it. Another user pulled up public records, highlighting dates most people never bothered to read. A third linked the timing of the viral post to a clause buried in standard divorce filings, explaining in plain language what the consequences could be if certain conditions were violated before finalization. None of it came from her. She hadn't added a single word. She didn't need to. He sat inside the villa now, the doors closed against the breeze, phone in hand as if it might bite him. Every refresh brought another wave of speculation. Some were wrong, some exaggerated, but enough of them aligned closely enough to the truth that the overall picture became impossible to dismiss. The internet wasn't guessing anymore. It was connecting dots. The mistress paced behind him, bare feet tapping sharply against the tile. Why is everyone suddenly talking like this is a crime scene? She snapped, scrolling furiously through her own feed. They're tagging me. They're asking questions. I didn't sign up for this. He didn't answer right away. His attention was fixed on a post breaking down timelines and bullet points, each one tightening the noose a little more. The phrase millionaire scandal appeared again and again, trending higher by the minute. He had always understood trends as momentum. This felt different. This felt like gravity. It'll blow over, he said finally, though the words sounded thin even to him. People are saying you lied, she said, stopping in front of him. They're saying you crossed legal lines. Is that true? He looked up at her then, irritation flaring. Of course not. She studied his face, searching for certainty. Then why won't you explain it? Because explaining makes it bigger, he snapped. This is exactly what she wants. The sentence hung in the air longer than he intended. She, the mistress, crossed her arms, lips pressing into a tight line. You told me she was done. That she was quiet because she didn't care. She is quiet, he said sharply. That's the problem. Online, the theories sharpened. Influencers weighed in with confident voices and carefully neutral language, the kind that sounded reasonable while implying guilt. Legal commentators explained hypotheticals that didn't name him directly, but might as well have. Every explanation ended the same way. If this is true, it could get messy. He called his lawyer again. This time, the tone on the other end wasn't reassuring. We need to be careful, the lawyer said. Do not post anything. Do not respond publicly. Let us review everything. Review what? He demanded. It's just speculation. Speculation backed by timestamps, the lawyer replied evenly. Which is not nothing. He ended the call without saying goodbye. As night fell, the villa felt smaller, the walls closer. The woman retreated to the bedroom, phone glued to her hand, replying to messages with increasingly clipped responses. He poured himself a drink he didn't want and stared out at the darkened ocean, replaying the day in his mind. The post, the comment. A moment he had dismissed it. Across the world, she moved through her evening normally. She cooked. She ate. She washed dishes. Her phone buzzed occasionally, messages from people she didn't open. She had expected this part. She knew how crowds worked. They needed a spark. She had given them one and stepped away. Back online, someone noticed something else. A detail buried deeper, less obvious than the scar. The reflection in the glass showed not just his wrist, but part of a document folder lying on a nearby table, its color and label faint but recognizable. Another connection formed. Another thread grew. By midnight, the narrative had fully inverted. He wasn't the man flaunting freedom anymore. He was the man who had exposed himself by underestimating the power of restraint. The mistress, once framed as a symbol of desire, became collateral, her presence now questioned, her motives dissected. He sat on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to his ear, as voicemail greeted him again and again. He tried her number, forgetting for a moment that he had blocked it himself. The call failed immediately. The realization landed hard. The block worked both ways. For the first time since the post went live, a sliver of panic cut through his composure. He wasn't losing control loudly. He was losing it quietly, systematically, the same way she always did things. Outside, the internet continued its work, stripping away assumptions, rearranging facts, and arriving at conclusions no one had needed her to spell out. The math was simple. Carelessness plus silence equaled exposure. And as he stared at the screen, watching his image fracture into something unrecognizable, he finally understood what she had known all along. The loudest power in the room isn't always the one speaking. The morning arrived without relief. Light filtered through the villa's wide glass doors, pale and indifferent, illuminating a space that now felt less like an escape and more like a waiting room. He hadn't slept, not really. He had closed his eyes, replayed conversations, refreshed feeds, checked messages he pretended not to care about. Control, the thing he had always trusted most, was no longer responding to his grip. His phone buzzed again before he even stood up. Another message from his assistant, carefully worded, trying not to sound alarmist. A partner wanted to touch base. A sponsor had questions. A board member suggested they postpone a scheduled appearance until things settled. Nothing had been canceled outright, but the hesitation was unmistakable. Doors weren't slamming. They were quietly closing halfway. He paced the length of the room, bare feet against cool tile, coffee untouched on the counter. The woman emerged from the bedroom, dressed sharply, phone already in her hand, jaw tight. She didn't smile this time. "They're calling me reckless now," she said flatly. "They're saying I should have known." He stopped pacing. "Known what?" "That this wasn't clean," she snapped. "That I was stepping into something unfinished." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. For the first time since this began, he realized how thin his explanations sounded even to himself. He had always assumed she would accept his version of events the way everyone else did. With admiration, with trust. That assumption was cracking fast. "I told you it was done," she continued. "You said there were no loose ends." "There aren't," he said, though the word felt heavier now. "This is just noise." She laughed, sharp and humorless. Noise doesn't make lawyers nervous. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't calm. It was edged with something closer to fear. She turned away from him and went back into the bedroom, closing the door with more force than necessary. He sank onto the couch and picked up his phone again. The 5-word comment still sat there, unchanged, surrounded by hundreds of replies he couldn't bring himself to read anymore. He searched her name instinctively, then stopped. She hadn't posted anything else. No follow-up. No clarification. The silence stretched on, deliberate and suffocating. He tried her number again, forgetting the block for the second time. The failed call felt personal now, like a reminder he couldn't undo with a swipe. He went into his contacts, hovered over her name, and hesitated. Removing the block meant opening a door He wasn't sure he wanted open anymore. But not removing, it meant admitting something else entirely. That she had chosen this distance. That she had planned it. He unblocked the number. Nothing happened. No missed calls appeared. No message came through. The quiet remained intact, untouched by his gesture. The power imbalance shifted another degree. Back online, the narrative hardened. Articles appeared with careful phrasing, framing the situation as a lesson in arrogance rather than scandal. Commentators spoke about restraint, about the risks of underestimating someone who chooses not to respond emotionally. The phrase hidden power began circulating, attached to screenshots of her comment, as if it were a thesis statement. His legal team sent a longer message this time, outlining scenarios they hadn't mentioned before. Asset freezes, delays, complications that could stretch for months. None of it was confirmed. All of it was possible. Possibility was enough to make investors nervous, and nervous investors didn't wait around for clarity. He threw the phone onto the table and rubbed his face, fingers pressing into his eyes until lights flickered behind his lids. He had always believed that momentum solved most problems. Keep moving, keep posting, keep smiling. The internet would get bored eventually, but this wasn't boredom. This was focus. The woman returned, keys in hand. "I'm going out," she said without looking at him. "I need space." "Don't do this," he said, standing abruptly. She turned then, eyes sharp. "You don't get to tell me that." The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the room. He stood there for a long moment, alone, surrounded by luxury that suddenly felt ornamental. He had built his life on the belief that people revolved around him. That belief had always held. Until now. Hours passed. Calls went unanswered. Messages grew shorter. He watched as the online conversation slowed slightly, not because interest was fading, but because conclusions had already been drawn. The internet had moved from asking questions to filing them away as facts. Across the city, in a space far less dramatic, she met with someone she trusted. The conversation was quiet, professional, prepared long before today. She listened more than she spoke, nodding occasionally, confirming details. There was no rush. Everything was already in motion. He didn't know that yet. What he knew was that the usual levers weren't working. Public silence hadn't drowned the story. Private reassurance hadn't calmed anyone. The mistress' exposure had mutated into something broader, something that touched his reputation at its core. As evening approached again, he sat alone, phone in hand, staring at the last message he had sent that morning. Seen. No reply. Control hadn't shattered. It had slipped. And the more he reached for it, the further it seemed to slide out of reach, leaving him with the unsettling realization that the quiet he once relied on was no longer his to command at all. By the third day, the noise had changed shape. The initial chaos had burned itself out, leaving behind something far more dangerous than outrage. Certainty. The internet had stopped arguing and started agreeing. His name still circulated, but now it carried context, summaries, conclusions neatly packaged for those arriving late to the story. What had once been a viral post was now a case study, and the tone had cooled into something unforgiving. He sat alone in a temporary office space, borrowed from a firm that hadn't officially cut ties yet, but had made it clear they needed distance. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, generic enough to belong to anyone. His laptop sat open on the table, emails stacked and unanswered, each one carefully worded, politely cautious, all circling the same message without saying it outright. "We're waiting to see how this ends. We don't want to be caught on the wrong side." He checked his phone again, though he already knew what it would show. No new messages from her. No missed calls. Nothing. The silence had hardened into something immovable, and for the first time since all of this began, he felt truly excluded from the narrative. Not attacked, not confronted. Simply removed. What unsettled him most wasn't the financial implications, though those were beginning to stack up quietly. It wasn't even the damage to his reputation, which he still believed he could eventually repair with the right strategy and enough time. What disturbed him was the growing awareness that none of this was impulsive. This wasn't a reaction. It was an execution. Across town, in a modest apartment that had never once appeared in a photograph, she moved through her day unnoticed. She wore comfortable clothes, her hair pulled back loosely, grocery list folded neatly in her pocket. She stood in line at a market, exchanged a brief smile with a cashier, stepped aside to let someone pass. No one recognized her. No one stared. The anonymity felt almost sacred. For years, she had been invisible in a way that hurt. Now, it felt intentional. She didn't open social media anymore. Not because she was avoiding it, but because she no longer needed it. The world was doing exactly what she had expected it to do when given a single well-placed spark. Strangers were dissecting details she had lived with. Commentators were drawing conclusions she had reached long ago. None of it required her presence. Later that afternoon, she sat at a small desk near the window, sunlight cutting across neatly organized folders. She reviewed documents she had prepared weeks earlier, her movements steady, her expression calm. The professionals she worked with respected her approach. She didn't dramatize. She didn't overreach. She brought facts, timelines, corroboration. The kind of information that didn't trend, but endured. One of them glanced up at her and said, almost casually, "You handled this very cleanly." She nodded. Clean mattered. Clean left no room for interpretation. Meanwhile, his world continued shrinking in ways that didn't announce themselves. A brand quietly removed his image from a campaign without explanation. A speaking engagement vanished from a website overnight. The date replaced with "to be announced." A longtime acquaintance sent a message that read, "Let's reconnect when things settle down," which translated easily into a language he now understood. "Don't call me." He stared at the screen longer than necessary, then set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He replayed every assumption he had made about her, one by one, seeing them now for what they were. He had mistaken patience for passivity. He had mistaken restraint for fear. He had believed that, because she didn't raise her voice, she had nothing to say. The mistress hadn't returned his calls. Her last message, sent the night before, had been short and carefully neutral. She needed space. She needed time. She hadn't signed up to be collateral. He didn't blame her. In another version of this story, he might have admired her instinct for self-preservation. Instead, he felt the quiet sting of abandonment layered on top of everything else. He typed her name into the search bar again, an old habit he hadn't yet broken. Nothing new appeared. No statements. No interviews. No emotional posts reclaiming her story. She remained exactly where she had been since the beginning of this. Unraveling, silent, composed, unavailable. That was when the realization finally settled fully into place. The 5-word comment hadn't been the move. It had been the punctuation. Everything else had already been written. The clause he hadn't bothered to read closely. The timing he had dismissed as irrelevant. The evidence he had provided himself, confident no one would ever look closely enough to see it. She hadn't needed to expose him. He had done that part on his own. He exhaled slowly, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sigh, and shook his head. He had always believed power belonged to those who spoke first, who spoke loudest, who controlled the spotlight. He had built his entire life around that belief. Only now was he understanding how incomplete it had been. That evening, as the sky darkened and the city lights flickered on one by one, she stepped out onto her balcony and let the cool air wash over her. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt finished, finished waiting, finished shrinking, finished being misread. The future no longer felt like something she had to defend. A message arrived from someone she trusted, confirming what she already expected. Everything was proceeding smoothly. No complications, no surprises. She closed her phone and set it aside, allowing herself a small, private smile that no one else would ever see. Back in the borrowed office, surrounded by borrowed time, he sat very still and finally accepted the truth he had avoided from the start. The power he feared now had never been loud. It had never needed an audience. It had waited patiently, silently, until he mistook quiet for emptiness. And by the time he realized who had been holding it all along, there was nothing left to say. The explanation came without a press conference, without a statement, without a single raised voice. It arrived the way everything else had, quietly. By the time the broader public understood what those 5 words actually meant, the outcome was already settled, filed, processed, and irreversible. It began with a document that surfaced late one evening, shared not by her, but by someone else who had access to public records and the patience to read them. The post didn't accuse. It highlighted. It showed a clause, a date, a requirement most people would never notice unless they were looking for it. The timing of the viral post intersected perfectly with a condition that restricted public behavior tied to asset control during separation. The detail in the photo, the location, a confirmation that he had been exactly where he claimed he wasn't supposed to be. It wasn't scandal. It was math. The 5 words suddenly made sense. They weren't a warning. They weren't sarcasm. They weren't emotional at all. They were confirmation. A quiet acknowledgement that he had done exactly what she expected him to do. That he had proven, without being asked, that he would always prioritize performance over caution. That he would hand over proof if given enough confidence and enough sunlight. Online, the tone shifted one last time. Not toward outrage, but clarity. People stopped speculating and started nodding. The story simplified itself. He hadn't been exposed by her. He had exposed himself. All she had done was mark the moment it became undeniable. The financial consequences followed without drama. Accounts were restructured. Control transferred. Legal filings moved forward smoothly, unchallenged by the noise that had once surrounded them. His team tried to push back, but there was nothing to argue against. The evidence wasn't emotional. It was procedural. And procedure didn't care about reputation. He learned about the final outcome from a message sent by his lawyer late at night, the wording careful, resigned. There would be no reversal, no appeal worth pursuing. The leverage he thought he held had never been fully his. It had been conditional, and the condition had been broken publicly. He sat alone when he read it, the room dim, the city humming faintly outside. For a long time, he didn't react. He simply stared at the screen, letting the weight of it settle. The loss wasn't just financial. It was structural. The image he had built of himself as the one who always moved first, always stayed ahead, cracked completely. Across town, she learned the same information differently. A brief call. A simple confirmation. Everything had gone through. She thanked the person on the other end, ended the call, and stood by the window for a moment, watching the evening light soften into dusk. There was no rush of triumph. No urge to share the news. It felt the way resolution often does. Quiet. Grounded. Complete. She thought briefly about the marriage, about the years that had taught her patience and precision, about the moments she had been underestimated because she didn't perform pain loudly enough. Those memories no longer carried sharp edges. They felt distant, instructive, rather than heavy. The internet moved on, as it always does. Another story replaced his within days, louder, messier, easier to consume. His name faded from trending lists, lingering only in analysis pieces and cautionary threads. He returned to a smaller life than the one he had flaunted, still comfortable by most standards, but stripped of the illusion that comfort equaled control. The mistress disappeared from public view entirely, her accounts scrubbed, her presence erased from the narrative as efficiently as it had once been inserted. No one blamed her. She had been a symbol, not the source. And she, the silent wife, never spoke again about any of it. No interviews, no memoirs, no carefully worded reflections. She didn't need to reclaim her story, because it had never been taken from her. She had simply waited for the moment it could no longer be ignored. On a quiet morning not long after, she walked through a park near her home, sunlight filtering through the trees, the sound of children laughing somewhere in the distance. She sat on a bench with a cup of coffee and let herself exist without an audience. The world felt steady, manageable, good. The lesson, for those who noticed, lingered long after the details faded. Power doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always argue. Sometimes it observes. Sometimes it prepares. And sometimes, when the moment is right, it says exactly 5 words and lets the truth take care of the rest. The story didn't end with applause or punishment. It ended with balance restored, quietly, and with the reminder that silence is not the absence of strength. Often, it is where strength waits.